I mean, Mariah, how many 11th graders do you know have access to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company?
Let me
Like,
say none until I heard about this story.
but that's the power. That's the
Yes.
power of the social capital that we're creating through our programs.
Welcome to the Ed Gap Evolution Podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Phillips. You can call me Mariah because that's my name, and I'm thrilled to have you on this journey with me and all of the spectacular guests who jump on the podcast to give you more options for educating children so that children have more options for building a magnificent future. The Ed Gap Evolution Podcast is a digital community where parents, educators, and innovators drop the details on how they are using their lives to help children explore the vastness of education beyond the textbook so that we can close America's education gap together. And just in case you didn't get the memo, producing a podcast is a whole lot of work. We're talking schedule coordination, production, the list goes on and on. So in return for bringing you this show every week, we just ask that you always find a way to share and use what you learn on the podcast to enrich children and families everywhere. Alrighty, without further ado, come along with me to meet our very next guest. Today on the podcast, we're speaking with Lateefah Durant. Lateefah is the Vice President of Innovation at CityWorks DC, a nonprofit venture incubated by CityBridge Education that is launching new and amplifying existing initiatives that reshape education to employment pathways for young people in Washington, D.C. So prior to joining CityWorks DC, Lateefah made waves in Prince George's County Public Schools as an officer of college and career readiness and innovative programs where she garnered substantial funding and resources in favor of improving college and career readiness pathways for students, among a suite of other notable accomplishments. Today, we are fortunate enough to have Lateefah with us on the show to talk about the great work going on at CityWorks DC and how Modern Youth Apprenticeship offers a vital solution to making sure more socially and economically disenfranchised youth can not only establish well-aligned career goals, but strategically and confidently achieve them. So, Lateefah, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on today's podcast. I am really excited about the community that you've built around closing the education gap.
Oh, thank you. It's our pleasure. Definitely my pleasure. And so I want to jump right in kind of to what you were doing prior to getting to CityWorks DC. So rarely do those of us listening, maybe some of us, but certainly not me, get a peek behind the curtain of what it's really like to be on the ground in an educational setting and really making change on a public level. I mean, for you, it was district wide when you were working in the public school system. So prior to joining CityWorks DC, you spent more than a decade managing budgets and starting programs for youth advancement in Maryland's PG County school system, which, needless to say, is hard work. So I'm wondering, when you first accepted your role as officer for the district's college and career readiness and innovative programs back in 2015, what motivated you to say, yes, like I'm the person for this role and I know that I'm going to execute it well? Or were you being a bit more apprehensive than that? Am I being idealistic?
Well, whenever I enter a new experience in life, I really try to remind myself that I am the woman for the job. Like, as women, as people of color, we sometimes wonder if we belong in the room, whether it's being a guest on a podcast, raising our kids, starting a new business venture, or taking on the challenge of serving as the officer of college and career readiness innovative programs. Whatever it is, I try to remind myself that I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in this position if I didn't add value. And so in that particular role, I knew that I had a passion to help all young people uncover their purpose and to take the steps they needed to get there. And at the time I took on the assignment, I'd already been working in the school district for several years. I had been redesigning our middle and our high schools. And so that work at the time was kind of taking root. And so it was a natural segue for me to shift into a role that really focused on ensuring that our students, when they left our doors, were ready for college and career because we had provided them with the technical skills, the employability skills, and the experience with college level coursework for them to be successful wherever their journey would take them.
And that's so exciting to me, and I'm sure to many others, because I know, I mean, what you were doing there and what you're doing with CityWorks DC, it's the readiness part. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
any of us can think of whether it's a new relationship. I know you got a new puppy recently.
Yes.
Anything that you just jump off new, sometimes it can be like, oh my God, I have no clue what's going on now. This is what. And so for you and the team that you work with there to have been so mindful of making sure that not only were you leaving high school and graduating, but being prepared for the next step. I just think that's so
Absolutely.
special and important. So thank you. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'd love to dig into your history a little bit more so that we can get to know you a little bit more. So where are you from? And I'm wondering, what about where you're from makes you special?
Ooh. So I grew up in Philly, a working class neighborhood in Philadelphia, where I would say every day men and women went to work, but they were constantly struggling to make ends meet, like robbing Peter to pay Paul. Um, I knew I wanted more out of life.
Mm-hmm.
So at a young age, I kind of set a course for what I thought that I wanted. It changed, of course, as time went on. But really, the backbone of that was my mom really stressing the importance of education. And so I decided to make education my vehicle to success. And it was my Head Start teacher when I was 4, actually, who gave me the fuel for the journey. So,
Wow.
yeah, she knew where I lived, and she knew my neighborhood elementary school. And she just didn't feel like it would serve me well. And so Ms. Winston, my Head Start teacher, allowed me to use her address from kindergarten all the way to the 8th grade, to attend a school that was in the middle class section of the city.
That's
And
awesome.
so, yeah, it was really awesome. Like the experience that I had at that school, C.W. Henry, like it really fed, my intellectual curiosity. It exposed me to people of different races and cultures and beliefs. And so it really gave me a strong foundation. And then I kind of continued to chart my course from there, going to a selective public high school and went to Ivy League college and graduate school. Um, I would say what makes I don't know, I would categorize it as special, but I think what my background makes unique about me is that it gives me unique perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
it's what really drives me to really ensure that every child has access to a high quality education, regardless of their zip code, because I
Right.
realize, without Miss Winston kind of entering my life story and changing the educational options that were available to me, my life outcomes could have looked quite different.
Yeah. And that, first off, virtual round of applause to Miss Winston. And
Absolutely.
because that's so special. I mean, first off, it's not every day that you see people take someone else's child in their educational path under their wing and say, "Hey, I know what this child is capable of. Let's get them in a space that they need to be in to thrive." And also, a few episodes ago, we talked about zoning laws, and I'm from Baltimore, in the
Mhm.
Baltimore and Baltimore County area, and I just want folks listening, be very mindful of that. In your area, whether you're in an affluent neighborhood or not, zoning laws are so important
Yes,
because not every kid's going to get the opportunity to have a Miss Winston to take them to a different zip code to be
absolutely.
educated. So we got to make sure that kids are getting what they can where they can, and making sure your school has the resources that they need. But I could go down a whole rabbit hole with that.
Absolutely. I could go with you too.
So let's climb out the rabbit hole and get back to. So in a minute, we'll jump into the work that you're doing specifically at CityWorks.
Sure.
To reshape employment pathways for high school students in DC, which is awesome. But what about when you were in high school? I know that you had a very unique experience in elementary school, but I'm wondering if you could sum up your high school experience in one word, what would that word be and why?
I would say the one word to describe my high school experience is exploration. It was in high school that I got to explore and experiment with different versions of me, like who I am and who I wanted to be. I was co-captain of the cheerleading team, but also captain of the debate team. So I didn't quite fit into one high school category.
Mm-hmm.
I also got exposure to possible careers, so
That's
I
great.
explored being a lawyer through mock trial. I explored
Wow.
being an ambassador in Model UN. Even explored sales when I worked as a shoe salesman and a telemarketer after school. You know,
Yeah.
I discovered a love of languages and culture when my mom held enough raffles and sold enough chicken dinners to pay my way to live in Venezuela for a summer.
Oh, awesome.
So I would say my like personal career in global exploration would definitely sum up my high school experience.
That's good. Was this a public high school?
It was a public high school in Philadelphia.
Wow, Philly. I mean, look, y'all. Clearly, we need to. I know some time has passed, but Philly was doing a great job then. I wonder how they're doing now. I got to look into more of the stuff that they're doing in those Philly schools because that sounds like an awesome experience. And kudos to your mom. I know exactly what it's like to have a big opportunity like that to travel and really have to kind of hustle to make sure it can happen. So I'm glad it was able to happen for you. And so. Thank you for sharing about your high school experience. Now we'll talk about the way you were helping to transform the lives of students in DC. And I
Mhm.
know I summarized what CityWorks DC does a bit in the bio, but you're in there. You know, you're the one doing it every single day, helping to carry this mission forward. So could you tell us exactly what CityWorks DC does?
Absolutely. So at CityWorks DC, we are a leading collaborator that's really devoted to reshaping the landscape of education and career development opportunities for DC youth of color. You know, we catalyze change by mobilizing local employers, by mobilizing educators and city leaders, you know, to create what we call a local, equitable talent pipeline that really provides high wage and high demand jobs that includes our young people.
First off, I need to take a second because I'm going to do a little jog around the block.
Okay.
Because it's just you don't hear too many things like this. I know that you guys we'll talk about city work career wise Colorado in a
Mhm.
second, but to have such a multifaceted and well thought out program where you're not only kids aren't just in school, not that there's not that school's bad, school's great, but like you're saying, there are other experiences that youth really need, especially if we're talking about socially and economically disenfranchised youth. We need um opportunities for children to be able to get a couple of steps up,
Yes.
outside of the traditional pathways. So I'm so excited about what you all are doing there. And so, if I'm not mistaken, Career Wise DC stems from CityWorks DC. Am I correct?
That's correct. So CityWorks DC is our organization. And like I said, CityWorks, we're involved in both developing like the systems and structures and conditions that provide young people of color in DC with access to good jobs. We also provide programming that propels early career outcomes of DC youth. And that's my role, is to work on our innovative programs. And so CareerWise DC is one of our programs that we offer at CityWorks. And CareerWise DC is our youth apprenticeship program. And that's where high school students learn on the job for 3 years in industries like IT and finance, all while they're working for employers like Accenture and Freddie Mac.
Going to top tier from the jump. That's awesome.
Well, we have both. We have both large multinational organizations, and then we also have a lot of small and medium sized firms as well, especially a lot of local, small, minority owned IT firms have sought to participate in CareerWise as a way to develop their talent.
That's spectacular. I love that. I know when I first entered corporate America, I worked for a smaller firm. I was in public relations though, nowhere near
Mhm.
IT. I worked for a smaller firm and then I worked for a bigger one. And it was just great. Like both experiences offer unique things. I think for the smaller firms, you really get sometimes for me, in my experience, I got a lot of hands-on work and got to see
Yes,
different parts of how the company was run. And then for the bigger ones, you're like, okay, this is how it looks at scale. So it's really cool that it's that diversity and experience for kids, whether they get to both or one or the other. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and so when students enter the youth apprenticeship program at CareerWise DC, what could you walk us through what that process might look like? Like, how do they discover that this opportunity is possible? And what is the process from discovering the opportunity is possible to them being in that seat or in that building?
Absolutely. So we try to keep the process as simple as possible. Being a former educator or being a parent, simple is best. And so we partner with a number of LEAs, schools, essentially in DC, from DC public schools, their IT career academies. We partner with Friendship Public Charter Schools, KIP DC, IDEA, WLA. And so we work with the schools to help us to promote the program and to talk to their students about this particular opportunity. And so if you're at any of those LEAs, if you're at any of the schools, definitely reach out and be in touch, and we can help you get connected and involved. Our program typically starts with 11th graders. So we have a very simple online application form that the students will fill out. We help them with their resume. We help them with interview preparation because ultimately it's our employers who are going to make the ultimate selection. And then we also help our young people work with the schools to make sure that they have school schedules that will enable them to participate in our youth apprenticeship program because they're released early from school during the day so that they can get to work on time. So a typical schedule might be you're in school from, let's say, until about 1 o'clock. You transition, you're at work by, let's say, 1:30, 2 p.m., and then you're working till 5 p.m. And so we need our school partners and the specific school partners that I just identified. They've been working with us to make sure that the school schedules are what they need to be so that the young people can be released for this work experience.
Now, when you said that, all I could think of was like when these young people, quote unquote, get into the real world and are no longer in school, they will be so used to having a full schedule and managing that it seems like the shock of it all won't be there as much as it might be for students who didn't have this, multifaceted and busy schedule. I think that it's so cool because I mean, let's be serious. When you're that age, you have way more energy than those of us who are not that age. And to be able to put that energy towards something that is helping to build your future is just so awesome. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
I was wondering, you said that a lot of the most of the programs are in IT, healthcare, and finance. Did you guys pick those particular sectors for a reason, or was there a thought process behind that?
We try to listen to our business partners, and we also rely on labor market data. So our business partners, they tell us what they need, and we respond to that need by providing the talent, as well as helping to train that talent on the occupations where our employer partners are hiring. So the reason we started offering finance was because Freddie Mac had a need and a role in their finance department. And so we are able, through our affiliation with CareerWise USA, to develop the competencies for that particular occupation and offer it, right? So we try to be responsive to what our employers are bringing to the table and what they say they need. But we also look at labor market data. And that's because we want to make sure that our young people are entering careers and career fields that are in demand, that those career fields provide opportunities for professional growth, and where there's opportunities for our apprentices to increase their earnings, both in the near term and long term. So those are the two pieces that go into our decision making around what career fields, what occupations we offer to our apprentices, both the need of the employer and the labor market data that we see in the DC region.
That makes so much sense. So like we talk so much about looking to the future on this podcast, and like that is clearly what you all are doing. So that's awesome. And with these apprenticeships, I know that you call them Modern Youth Apprenticeships. And so as a refresher for all of us, an apprenticeship generally is an arrangement in which someone learns an art, trade, or a job under another person. So I'm wondering what makes a modern apprenticeship different from a traditional, quote, just regular old apprenticeship.
Most people, when they hear the word apprenticeship, they have some preconceived notions. So one, they typically think it's for adults only. They think that it's limited to the construction trades. And they'll also typically think it's for those who are not going to college. And so that's why CareerWise DC makes a distinction, that this program is a modern youth apprenticeship. And that means You don't have to wait until your mid-20s to get a start. You can start in high
Yes.
school. B, it's not just about the construction trades. Like you mentioned, we have IT, we have finance, we have business operations. And C, it doesn't mean that you're not going to college. In fact, we offer opportunities for our young people to take debt-free college courses while they're in their apprenticeship through our partnership with Purdue Global University. And in fact, most of our apprentices continue their college studies after the apprenticeship is over, either on a part-time or a full-time basis. So that's what makes it modern. I think it's really just helping people to understand that apprenticeship is more than what you thought it was or what you might have conceived of it in your grandparents' day. That you can be young, you can still be in high school, that you can do it in what we call non-traditional fields like finance and IT, and that you can also go to college while being in an apprenticeship.
That's great. I'm wondering also. So you all, CareerWise DC is an affiliate of CareerWise Colorado, right?
Yes. So, well, CareerWise Colorado, now it's CareerWise USA, but yes, we are an affiliate.
Okay. And so, was the program there, or is the program there? Are they all structured the same? Is it the same structure for every program, or do the structures vary based on location?
So the structures are similar, I would say, across locations. It does vary a bit depending on like jurisdiction. So one of the reasons that we're working with CareerWise Colorado is that they kind of have systems and structures in place to help the youth apprenticeship model to thrive, right? And so we have the opportunity to be one of several affiliates in Colorado, in New York, and Indiana. And so together we had this unique opportunity to scale youth apprenticeship across the nation. And we also have a community of practice among the affiliates in the various locations that really enables us to share our learnings, to share best practices, as well as create some efficiencies and economies of scale that helps to lower the cost of programming. So that's why we've chosen to work with the CareerWise USA structure. They're also helping us around, as I mentioned earlier, some of the occupational frameworks and the competencies that have been developed. Some of those things we're able to utilize in our context here in DC, but then each of the affiliates are also able to modify to fit the needs of their young people and employers as well.
It makes so much sense to have, if there's a framework in place that works and you can just tweak it a little bit for your area, then why not?
Absolutely. But I would say, at CityWorks, while in this case around CareerWise, we use an existing structure and framework, but we also have the ability at CityWorks to kind of, when we see a need, to create new and innovative solutions. So that's my role, right? As the president of innovation, we started a new program last year that serves out of school youth. We saw that there was a need among recent graduates from high school that weren't connected to school or to work. And so we decided to design and launch our Embark program, which is a different program than we're talking about today. But that one provides young adults 18 to 26 with career coaching and supports that actually helps them to achieve their long-term goals. So we do a both and, in the cases where there's an existing structure that we can build upon, then that is the CareerWise model. But then there's also been instances where we've had to start and create new programs from the ground up.
Now, I'm on you all's website at the moment, and I'm just saying this because, guys, there's a donate button. There is a donate button, and you hear the great things that are going on. You hear how Lateefah and her team, when they see a need, it's not only framework that already exists, but when they see a need, they bring about a solution. Mm-hmm. And as much as we'd love to say that is common, it is not always common, and we're hoping to bring more of that to the world. So thank you for bringing so many solutions to youth in DC. And for those of you listening, if you feel compelled and you identify or really support with what they're doing here, definitely we'll shout out the website at the end. Please support this type of work because we need to see more of it happening. And speaking of bringing, this structure to DC, why was it necessary to bring a program like this to the DC area? Like when this when this was found in the DC area, what was the thought? Like, did you guys look at any stats or things like that?
Yeah, so we felt like it was important to bring the CareerWise model to DC because really every year there are hundreds of thousands of new good jobs in DC. And so when I say good jobs, I mean where you can make 60,000 or more, which is
Right.
actually what you need just to reasonably live in our
Yes.
city with yourself and one dependent. Like that's not living large. That's just like to take care of
Just
yourself.
getting by.
It's getting by. It's getting by. But despite the hundreds of thousands of new jobs every year in the city, very few Washingtonians actually fill those jobs, right? And
Wow.
so the CareerWise DC program gives young people entry-level access to these jobs with opportunities to earn industry certifications, to earn college credits, and to develop their professional network.
That is just let me take a pause. Because the reason I am so overwhelmed by what you all do is because, Baltimore's right up the street from DC, and I can just see my story fit so perfectly into what you all are doing. Being African American, being from a basically a poor community, let's not sugarcoat it. And having so many opportunities. Baltimore isn't nearly as developed in the job market as DC, but growing up, there were a lot of excellent job opportunities, and I would be working downtown or working at the ice cream shop, and I'm like, how do I get in them buildings? How do I stop making $10 an hour and get to the point
Yes.
get to the point where I can be in a nice air conditioned office, and not just that, have skills that can carry me through life. And so I'm just so excited for folks to keep getting a hold of this, and really looking forward to seeing the numbers increase in the future for the amount of especially youth of color DC residents who are then able to fill those spots and get those good jobs. And so moving along here, I'm really a fan of many things, clearly, that you all guys are doing. But one thing that really gets me excited, just like I mentioned briefly, is that youth are able to learn how to, quote unquote, make it in a goal-oriented corporate setting that may or may not lack in diversity. And so, drawing from personal experience, the traditional lack of diversity and culturally familiar atmosphere as a young Black woman was one of the hardest aspects to overcome when I was in corporate America. So, through mentors and stuff, I was able to do it, but it wasn't easy. So can you briefly walk us through how your team works to help students of color navigate these spaces? Like, what sorts of conversations or trainings might be held, if at all?
Absolutely. It's funny, as you were talking about a good friend of mine, Carice Anderson, recently wrote a book called Intelligence is Not Enough. And so, as a woman and a person of color, I know education is not enough to make it in a corporate setting, right?
Yeah.
So to prepare our CareerWise apprentices for the workplace, we start with a professional development institute in the summer. And we do that to ensure that our apprentices have the critical workplace skills like verbal and written communication and working on a team. But we also talk about topics like code switching, microaggressions, self-advocacy. And those conversations don't stop once they start the job. Our team continues to meet with each apprentice every week to help support them, because we're trying to support them through their particular work, their particular school, in their particular life context. And then we also bring them together as a group, and we convene them monthly to have ongoing professional development sessions around the areas of transition that they and their employers have identified would be most helpful. But I also want to say, we don't just help the students learn how to work in a corporate setting. We also work with employers to help them to create a more supportive and inclusive environment for young people and people of color, right? It's often the burden of the person of color to adapt and to change to fit the corporate context. But we also are talking to our corporate partners to talk about what can you do differently? How can you create a more supportive and inclusive environment? I mean, Mariah, how many 11th graders do you know have access to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company?
Let me say none until I heard about this story.
But that's the power. That's the power of the social capital that we're creating through our programs. And especially, like I said, around adolescent development, many, if you haven't had a child recently or worked with young people in the education setting, you may not understand all the nuances
Totally
of
removed.
adolescent development, right? And so we want to make sure that they just understand a little bit about, what's a normal process? What's a normal part of adolescent development? What are some things you can expect from adolescents? And how can you best support adolescents in the workplace?
That is awesome. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking even I can relate to that in so many different ways, which I won't spiral into now, but it is just very important to make sure that the employer is also, cognizant of that difference, and of the different ways that they need to support. Because like you were saying, a lot of times the responsibility is placed on the person of color or the youth or whoever, is coming into the atmosphere, and it's like, wait a minute, this is the partnership, we both
Exactly.
need to be on the same page. We both need to be bringing 100% to the table. So that is an awesome aspect of it all. And I think what's so cool about the fact that you said, first they have their one-on-one meetings weekly or their meetings weekly, and then they go into a group meeting atmospheres. I remember when I was in high school and even in college, and even now as an adult, it's just so wonderful to have a community that is going through the same thing as you, be it
Yes.
good or bad. And to have people, hey, you know what I'm going through. Hey,
Yes.
I didn't know you before, and because of this collective thing, now we know each other, and you might form some new relationships that last lifelong. So,
Absolutely.
what is so exciting about these sorts of programs like you're doing is not only is it getting people where they need to go, career wise, it's building lifelong relationships that will help them in the future. And speaking of that, I have a question for you on social capital, because I
Mm.
know when I first approached your organization about this interview, that was something that was brought up. And for those who need a refresher, social capital is the networks and relationships among people who live and work in a particular society or community that enables that society and the people within it to function more effectively. So
Mhm.
just having a good old network.
Yep.
And so let's talk about the importance of that when it comes to career advancement, or even just jump starting your career to get that first job as a young person. What Why do you believe, at CareerWise DC, that social capital is so important for youth, and what becomes possible for youth when they have social capital versus when they do not?
We live it every day, right? So social capital is vitally important to career advancement because it's an important source of power and influence that helps people to get ahead. Our young people, they have social capital. They have it in their families, in their communities, in their social groups, but we're helping them to build the social capital they need to access opportunity in the professional setting. And this is the space where many of our young people don't have the social capital to leverage connections for their benefit. So what does social capital look like in the workplace? It's the difference between submitting your resume on a company's job board where you are one of 100 or even 1,000 applicants
Mhm.
versus a former supervisor calling the hiring manager, recommending you, and sending your resume to that person.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's the
Huge difference.
difference, huge difference. It's social capital is the difference between, again, applying for a job that's listed on the job board versus a job being created for you because your skill set is known and valued in that industry. And so at CityWorks DC and through our programs like CareerWise DC, we're helping young people of color to develop a supportive professional network. For those in our youth apprenticeship program, they're developing that professional network through, as you just talked about, like the cohort that they're building and amongst their peers. But they're also building that professional network through their place of work, through the supervisors, the colleagues, and the coaches at the job site. They all become a part of their network. Through their work experiences, they extend that network to the clients, to the vendors, to the partners affiliated with their jobs. And the network they build isn't necessarily limited to DC, right?
Mhm.
So I mentioned that one of our partners is Accenture. And so Accenture has employees and clients all over the world, right? And so
Yeah.
while our apprentices in DC and their reporting structure may be in DC, the reach of the network that they develop certainly is not. So, for example, last year, the youth apprentices at Accenture participated in this virtual, I think, ice cream social. They sent them some things in the mail as we were in a pandemic. And in that virtual meeting, they had the opportunity to hear from the CEO of the company, Julie Sweet. And so after the meeting, one of our apprentices sent her a note sharing how much she enjoyed the talk and what she gained from the experience. I mean, Mariah, how many 11th graders do you know have access to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? You know,
Let me
like,
say none until I heard about this story.
but that's the power. That's the
Yes.
power of the social capital that we're creating through our programs. And you can contrast that to our young people without a professional network, without that supportive professional network. They're struggling to access job opportunities. And that's often the situation of our participants in the Embark program that I mentioned earlier, right? So in this case, CityWorks DC steps in and we leverage our own social capital and the social capital of our staff and our partners and our relationships to develop relationships with businesses that are hiring in our region so that we can make introductions on behalf of those young people, so that we can contact hiring managers to be able to help facilitate the young people in our Embark program to get access to those jobs where they may not have the social capital to get entry, And so what I love about CityWorks DC is that we're uniquely positioned to both help our young people to develop social capital, but we're also positioned to help provide and leverage our own social capital where we can to really serve the young people that we work with.
Yes, and I'm just so excited for these young people because it sounds weird, but I'm excited for when they get to the age in like their mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Where they realize how far they've come and they look back and they're like, oh my God, if it wasn't for that experience, if it wasn't for taking that path, I probably wouldn't be right here as successful, and success is different to everyone, but as successful as I am today, like that is just such a good feeling. And I'm excited for the lives that they will touch and help to enrich because of that. And so I know I've said thank you a million times, but thank you for the work that you're doing. And so let's zoom out a bit. I'm wondering, Lateefah, what is the world, in your opinion, what is the world taking too long to realize when it comes to the way that we educate youth, and how are you changing that?
Ooh, well, I'm going to try to keep my response narrow. That's a rabbit hole we could go down together. But right. I'll just say this. In the U.S., we still have a one-size-fits-all approach to education that doesn't fit for most, and especially not for our students of color. And as a country, we largely still believe that the only way to financial independence is through the direct admission to a four-year university after high school. When in reality, our learners are diverse, not just in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, but also when it comes to how they learn and how they want to achieve their career goals, right? So at the end of the day, as a parent and as an educator, we want our children to achieve financial independence. But what needs to change is what we believe about the path to get there. In fact, there is no one path. Right. What needs to change is helping our systems and structures and those in places of power to understand that there are multiple pathways that lead to a fulfilling career that provides financial independence, right? And so at CityWorks DC, we're striving to be an options multiplier. What does that mean? The work that we're doing gives young people options. That is, they may go directly into work. It may be a combination of work and school. It may be going full-time to school. Whatever the path is, we're here to prepare our young people for it through what we call the social mobility trifecta, which is 1, paid work experience, 2, a supportive professional network, and 3, the post-secondary credentials they need to get there.
An options multiplier. Y'all need to make that a t-shirt.
I like that. Definitely gonna have to put it. We are an options multiplier.
Yes, that is options. It's just so important. Because, that's like you said, Yeah, that's what we want. And like you said, there's no one path. People change and there need to be options, because if you don't have options, when you hit a brick wall, when you see a blockage, you're like, "Oh my God, that's it for me."
Absolutely.
This is all I thought was possible. But when you have options, the possibilities are endless. And so I'm wondering, you said that your program is always looking for new employment partners, right?
Always, always, always. We are always accepting new business partners, whether that's for our apprenticeship program, for our Embark program that works with out of school youth, even on the systems change side, because we need employers too, through our efforts at the Federal City Council and the Employers for Equity Initiative, to help to change the way the ecosystem functions for our young people. And so we welcome business partners in any way they want to get connected. We can help to plug them in.
Sweet. So what's the best way for them to get in touch?
You know what? Your listeners can certainly email me directly at Durant, that's LDURANT, at citybridge.org.
Okay, perfect. So you guys heard that. And I'm also going to drop that in the show notes. And for parents, caretakers, and anyone looking to get involved or support CityWorks DC, how can we learn more about the program, and how can we stay in touch with you all that way?
Sure. So employers, parents, anyone who wants to get connected to CityWorks or CareerWise, our social media handles are at CityWorks DC, as well as at CareerWise DC. So that's at CityWorks DC and at CareerWise DC. And we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, probably coming to a TikTok soon too, near you.
Well, you guys heard it from Lateefah directly, y'all. Coming to a TikTok near you soon. They're on all the social platforms. You can visit their website. And I mean, this is one of those episodes that I would encourage you to listen to again and again, and to share around, because there are so many gems that were dropped. Lateefah, thank you so much for joining us today. And for the 1 millionth and billionth time, thank you for the work that you all are doing at CityWorks and CareerWise DC. It was such a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciated the opportunity.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So what'd you think? How will you take what you learned today on the EdGap Evolution podcast to make sure that more children and families know that they have more options for building a magnificent future? If you like what you heard and want to get notified when the next episode goes live, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll notify you when the next episode is out. Don't forget to check the show notes where I share information on today's guest. And yes, we do have a website. You can always pop in on us at www.edgapevolution.com. Again, I'm Mariah Phillips, and I leave you with this. Embrace the evolution, y'all.